Hello, and welcome to Nosotros, the podcast about Mexican-American politics, history, cultura, y más, brought to you in part by the Gomez Law Firm. I'm your host, Elaine Ayala, columnist for the San Antonio Express News. My guest today is Ron Nirenberg. His term as mayor of the seventh largest population in the United States. I have to say it very precisely because we've been saying it wrong, right, for a long time. And one of the nation's fastest growing cities is soon coming to an end. He's the first San Antonio mayor of Asian Pacific Islander descent. His mother, Filipino, his paternal grandparents were immigrants from Eastern Europe, and they came through Ellis Island. He was first elected in 2017 and was re-elected to his fourth and last term in May of 2023. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Elaine.
Before we get started, I like to play a game.
Okay.
Rapid fire questions.
Okay.
If you can. Some of my guests don't pay attention to that. That's okay. If it spurs a conversation, I'm all right.
Got it.
A game of this or that.
Okay.
The Department of Housing and Urban Development or the Department of Labor?
Both extremely important departments for our country and for our community, and both I've worked very well with over the last several years.
That's why I picked those two. The other one I picked was, if you were to say the Department of Labor, I would have said the Department of Labor or the Department of Transportation.
So both of those departments and functions within our community have incredibly important foundational support for economic mobility. And I had a very interesting conversation with Secretary Sue at the Department of Labor, talking about how maybe the Department of Labor name needs to change to the Department of Opportunity, because essentially the tie between stable housing and workforce labor is so important. And, again, having a safe, affordable roof over one's head is the foundation for economic security.
For everything.
But to have the ability to thrive in the 21st century economy, you also require a good job that pays a good wage with benefits. And so we're really not talking about labor. In some cases, we're not talking about housing. We're talking about opportunity, which is the American dream.
So good. Here's a tough one. Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg?
Oh, my goodness.
Isn't that a horrible decision? You got to do it, though. Or say something.
This one has challenges with the truth and understanding the responsibility of moderating a digital public square. That one has a alarming disregard for the consequences of social isolationism.
Oh, so good. A new baseball stadium or a new Spurs arena?
This is happening in a way that I think sets a new standard for what we expect private organizations to contribute to our community in the process of building these kinds of facilities. That one is an important part of the Spurs' future, I believe, if they are going to continue to thrive in an expanding market within the NBA.
You're so good. Batman or Robin?
Batman.
Whataburger or Chris Madrid's?
Oh, my goodness.
Remember, Chris Madrid's is no longer owned.
I know.
The Chris Madrid family.
Well, just from personal experience, Whataburger.
The pearl or the rim? It's easy. Come on, say it.
The pearl.
Yeah, of course. Corn or flour?
Corn.
Okay. Good to know. All right, now we get to the question.
Okay. I don't know if I even played the game properly.
You didn't, but that's okay because everybody brings to it what they need to. And it's always very few actually answer it because they're hard, except for the corn or flour. You know, I asked Little Joe several of these, and I asked him, concha or donut? And he said, without skipping a beat, donut. I was so surprised by that, but you know, he has diabetes.
Yeah. Well,
there you go. Okay, as your tenure winds down, what would you consider your greatest achievement and your biggest regret?
I would say the thing I'm most proud of during my time as mayor of the city is that we have, for the first time, committed ourselves as a community, and I mean not just the city government, but the entire community, to addressing the fundamental core challenges of San Antonio's the fundamental core challenges of San Antonio. What I mean by that is, when I first started, we began my tenure with a sober look at the challenges of equity in this community: health disparities, socioeconomic inequity, poverty, redlining, those things that would be far easier for our community to look away from and continue to, grow and expand and pursue economic prosperity that quite often and frankly for generations has left communities behind. Mm-hmm. We said we're going to focus on inclusive prosperity, and so I'm proud of the fact that for the first time in our city's history, we are united in pursuit of economic mobility for every person in the city.
Biggest regret, or one of your biggest regrets?
I tend not to dwell on regrets, but I will say that, it's challenging because you can't. This is a big dynamic city with hundreds of years of history, and we can't reach those areas of progress. We can't move fast enough. And in fact, sometimes progress creates a lot of friction, and that's a big challenge. We know that San Antonio is a place where, there is an opportunity now through a resource cradle to career pipeline that includes expanded pre-K access, an Alamo Promise program that reaches literally every Bexar County high school graduate, a ready-to-work workforce training program where people who have been unemployed or unemployed can now seek a new career path for a good, well-paying job. We know we've built an environment where if you want a new path to opportunity in the city, we have one for you. But even that, it's very hard to reach every person. The challenges in this city have run so deep, we can't change that overnight. And that is, it's constantly a reminder that we need to do more. We need to do better.
Tell us about your most difficult day, or one of them, and then your best day in office.
Oh, well, there's a lot. So the first thing that comes to mind on difficult days, I remember, the early days of the pandemic, where we really had no lifeline, no playbook. For all practical purposes, the Trump administration had abandoned their responsibility to respond to this crisis in America, and people were just trying to figure out what to do. And we didn't know a lot about the virus. We just knew it was deadly and it was highly infectious, and it was starting to move through communities very quickly around the time that the nursing home in Seattle, dozens of people were dying. So it arrived in San Antonio, and it was beginning to move through San Antonio, and we were trying to figure out how to keep people safe. And there were a couple of those decisions in particular. One of the decisions to shut down food establishments. Mm-hmm. We struggled over that one. I struggled with that one for, hours on end, one decision or another, and having to make that decision, which I knew would have an economic impact, God willing, short-lived, was a real challenge. Amidst all of that, continuing to get calls about friends, relatives, constituents who were turning up in the hospital, who were struggling, waiting for ventilators in some cases. So it was really very much sort of in the midst of the crisis, trying to get our community's feet underneath us so we could respond in a effective way.
I have to say those daily gatherings online, on television. God, it was must-see television every night. Even just to see Nelson Wolff struggle with his mask. The guy never learned how to put his mask on. But they were so entertaining and such important information. I mean, we were getting on there. Yeah. Members of my family watching it every day.
Thank you. Well,
watching the numbers.
Right.
With such shock.
Yeah. And that was kind of the point, was to ensure that there was some consistent place to go for information and guidance that was directly from the source, in this case, the public health professionals, to provide a sober analysis and ensure that they saw leadership working together. We didn't have a whole lot of answers, but at least we were committed to working together. And that helped build some trust within these institutions that were so vital to save people's lives. I think that was part of the formula for success in San Antonio. And relative success, we lost thousands of people. Mm-hmm. But relative to some other communities, we fared better. And I attribute that to the fact that this community rallies around each other. And Nelson and I made it a point that we were going to do everything together so people could see teamwork. Yes. And people could trust that we were working together, and we were being honest. When we didn't have answers, we were being honest when we made the right call or the wrong call, and we adjusted accordingly.
Mm-hmm. It was a very calming way to lead, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
Best day, one of your best days. I'm sure there's a lot.
There's a lot. And my personality is move on to the next thing, so there's not a whole lot of reflection. I'm sure I will have them.
You mean you're not making notes for your book now? Come on.
There's very little time to dwell, but some of the best days. I remember as a city councilman when we finally consummated the deal to save the Bracken Bat Cave from being developed over. I remember making the call to Chancellor Mike Flores, saying that we're in, got the funding for Alamo Promise to start this program. Oh. I remember sitting there watching the voter rolls come in November 2020, where we bet on this city like we've never bet on this city before, to expand pre-K, to invest in public transportation, to invest in getting people back to work. And voters came out in droves to support it. We rolled the dice on housing affordability. I remember that was a great day too when voters approved the housing bond. There have been days on the dais where, my first day in office, actually, after getting sworn in, we said we were going to be in on the climate accords and develop a climate action strategy for San Antonio. Those are all good days, but, the way this job works is that those are all bricks that you lay for the foundation, and as soon as one is laid, you got to get to work on the next one. And so that's the nature of it. And that's also a little bit of the trepidation. I am at the end of my tenure, and I believe very strongly that we are, we're in a relay race. I took the baton from someone. I will hand the baton off to someone else. The nature of our work is not that there's a start and an end. We have progress that we need to move. Very proud of the fact that we've decided to run this race against poverty towards economic prosperity for everyone. I'm hoping that the next person who takes a baton continues to run in the right direction.
And that leads to my next question. What's your advice to the next mayor, and any guesses on who that will be?
Well, what day is it? We're October of 2024.
It's
early October 2024. By my count, we're a good, 8-9 months away from mayor's race. We're still thinking about the presidential election. I think it's very hard for people to concentrate on the municipal election. So,
agreed.
TBD on who I think will be mayor. I have some thoughts about what I've seen so far, but my hope for the next mayor, what I would advise them, is that we have as a community demonstrated what's important to us: investing in people, changing the course of poverty in the city, making sure that we not only build a great city that houses all the wonderful amenities, a beautiful new airport, a thriving downtown scene with sports venues and restaurants and a new R1 university. But we also have committed ourselves to improving the lives of communities, generations on the west side and on the east side and on the south side who have not been typically included in that prosperity over the years as our economy is diversified. We have dedicated ourselves to bringing everyone along. And that's demonstrated through the 70+% of people who support public transportation, housing, workforce, pre-K. We have to make sure that we continue on that course. We are beginning to move in the right direction. We are seeing our poverty numbers start to decline, believe it or not. We, in the Brookings Metro Report, are now the most geographically inclusive city in the country, meaning that your zip code does not dictate the level of service, the availability of services that are essential for your daily life. We are closing the gap on rich and poor faster than most cities in the country now. So we're beginning to move these indicators in the right direction that have taken, Herculean efforts across the community to do. My advice would be keep moving in that direction and find ways we can accelerate the progress. Again, back to your question about regrets. Some communities have been waiting for multiple generations for this progress to reach them. They don't have patience to wait for politics. And so how can we do it better? How can we do it faster? There's been a lot of debate. Do we need a new vision? Do we need a new strategic plan for the city? My response to that is that this community has never been short of vision. In fact, this community has an abundance of dreams. What we have lacked is a consistent effort and execution across the board to reach them. I still go back to SA 2020. One of the motivating factors of me getting involved in politics, where when my son was, 2, 3, 4 years old, I was at a table talking about what the future of his city might be when he was my age. That was exciting to me. That vision hasn't changed much. It's in the context of 2024 now, but it hasn't changed. We want San Antonio children to be able to, regardless of their zip code, be able to go to a great school and get a great education. We want people, regardless of whether they live on the south side, the north side, or anywhere else, to enjoy high quality healthcare, and to have, good infrastructure to drive on and to, be part of their neighborhoods. So the things that we want out of our city have not changed. What I would say, though, is that our ability and our willingness to tackle them and to move in that direction has, in a good way. Two things can be true at the same time. One is you cannot be where you want to be. You could be very short of your destination. We are not where we want to be as a city. But are we moving in the right direction? I say absolutely yes. And that's why voters have continued to support these kinds of initiatives and supported the leaders who put them forward.
I was going to ask you about the equity in city budgeting aimed at reversing historical
underinvestment.
Yes, inequity.
Mm-hmm.
And that the jury is still out, but you tell us there's some slight changes, and I'm going to look up that data. But poverty has persisted. I live in 78207, and I see it in my neighbors. There's one big house, 7 cars, because they got to live together to be able to pay for housing. That's all over my neighborhood. That's why everybody is parked on the street, because there's not enough room. What has to be done on the federal level that impacts local government to better respond? Because, it just takes more money. It takes more people on Medicaid. It takes more people not living on minimum wage.
I wholeheartedly agree. And so, again, back to the point, putting a program in place doesn't create the solution overnight. And when you're dealing with generational poverty, which again exponentially expands, it's going to take a committed, long-term commitment to change. And so with respect to the things that need to be done at the local level, investing in housing, investing in infrastructure in all parts of town, the equity frame was first applied to basic street infrastructure because we literally had, and still do, because we haven't gotten everywhere. We have children walking to school in the mud because they don't have sidewalks.
Yes.
And more
less and less, but we still have it.
But we still have it. And so that's the point, is that we have to address that. It's going to take time, but if we stay committed, we will address it. In the affluent, newer areas of town, you don't have that because we've created policy that changes that. Anyway, not to get too far into concrete infrastructure. We have aligned these efforts, housing, infrastructure, workforce, at the local level. And certainly there are tweaks and we can do things better, I'm sure. But by and large, we're aligned. What needs to happen at the state and federal level? Just because we've done some things at the local level doesn't mean that there's all of a sudden everybody's aligned everywhere else too. In fact, there's headwinds to all of these efforts, some of them through the private sector, some of them through politics. One of the things you mentioned in housing, we have an incredible housing affordability crisis in America. The cost of housing continues to rise, outpacing people's wages. We need to do two things. We need to not only make sure that people are able to, so we need to make sure that people have good jobs with benefits and with good wages. And the fact that we still have a $7.25 minimum wage after decades here in Texas is one of the problems. That has not changed, and it needs to.
Though I will say that even at food establishments, the fast food, they're paying more than that. It's still not enough. Some of them are paying more than double that.
Right. That's not the only thing. Mm-hmm. The other thing you see is cost pressure because of the commodification of housing in this community, in the country. there's a wonderful documentary that's about to be put out regarding the role of Wall Street in the cost of housing. Mm-hmm. You have wholesale blocks in some cases being bought up by investors to trade housing. Nobody's living there. They're just using it as stock to, get a margin. And what the
evil.
Yeah, well, and what that does is it raises the cost of housing artificially as you see stocks on Wall Street going up and down. Mm-hmm. That's creating cost pressure, particularly on people at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. There's two things. I mean, there's many more, but those are two things on both sides of the ledger that are creating this kinds of pressure. Yeah, we can invest in housing affordability at the local level. We can create policy to facilitate that, but we also need to make sure that we, have folks who are aligned with that effort in other areas of responsibility. And state and federal officials have a role in this, and we can't look away from that.
Okay, so a lot of these questions are related.
Yeah.
Because I want to talk about developers and economic development, which is very different than people development.
Yeah.
And opportunity development. So I think it's real easy to see developers as negative forces.
Yeah.
And that benefit the rich at the expense of gentrification, raising affordable housing. We're in the midst of that. How do you reconcile this, especially as critics of counsel, critics of yourself have targeted this kind of development, talking aloud about it, challenging you and others on counsel about it?
Well, and first, I think there's a role for that. In fact, I meet regularly with Cops Metro. Cops Metro in this community has been a voice of conscience to make sure that people are reminded that there's a human impact to development, to economic development, and that role of advocacy is important to continue to balance the conversation now. What I would say about development is that none of this gets done. Infrastructure, housing, you name it, the things that need to get built in this community or improved in this community are done by, in most cases, businesses, developers. And so our role as a government institution is to create the policy framework for which that work takes place. And that's where the effort to develop a housing plan, to create resources for facilitating the kind of subsidized housing that's required for some members of our community, that's where government comes in. So I think it's important for us to understand there's a role for everybody here, and everyone is playing their role properly, we can accomplish our goals. That being said, I go back to the original statement. This didn't happen overnight. This is a 300-year-old city. For its entire existence, there have been haves and have-nots, some by intentional public policy. We're redressing a lot of that. We're improving through investment communities. That creates impact. We've got to address that as well. But we're making progress. It's not going to get changed overnight, but we are moving in the right direction. So when it comes to development that improves a community that has been left behind, there's a lot of concern. There's a lot of anxiety about what the impact will be by raising property values, by improving housing, and in some cases redeveloping housing. I would say that the answer is not no more investment. In fact, that's kind of what we were doing before. The answer is let's make sure we facilitate investment, but put the proper guardrails and expectations in place from a public policy standpoint so that no one is left behind. And I believe that's what we're doing. And, I know there's critics about any specific development, and we can talk about specifics, but that's the overall goal, is that we can continue to improve this community, but we create the frameworks in place to make sure that no one is negatively impacted, or that those negative impacts that would exist are addressed.
Will the shelter, the homeless shelter, Haven for Hope, should it stay where it is?
Well, there's a lot of conversation about the placement of the jail, methadone clinics.
Both of those.
Haven for Hope. Those are institutions that have incredible importance in our community. If there was no cost for us to pick it up and move it, there's a good debate to be had. But what is the cost of moving it? I don't know if it's worth it to entirely uproot a institution that has such a long history, as opposed to how do we use our resources wisely to ensure that the impacts of having that institution in a community are addressed. So I recognize that probably through short-sighted politics, it was easy to place
in 78207.
Yeah. And at that point in our public policy, the negative impacts weren't really talked about. We're talking about those now. And so now that we are, what can we do to address them? So, I don't know if we even have the opportunity to go back and do those things over. But if we don't, how do we make sure that communities are uplifted in the process?
Yeah, one of the upside, perhaps, of fancy development may be that they want it out. And when that happens, 78207 will benefit. And however it happens, I hope it does. Jail 2.
Yeah.
I think our inmates deserve a better jail too. Anyway, okay, that's me.
That's a county issue. I'll
yeah. You'll defer?
Yeah.
Okay, for the longest time, you just don't see mayors jump into party politics. But it's the end of your term, and it's no secret you've become a surrogate for the Harris-Walz ticket. Tell us what you've been doing. Tell us how you see the election going forward. Will Texas turn another shade of blue?
Well, red is not real close to blue. So when you say another shade of blue, I hope it turns some shade of blue, even if it's purple.
I think it's okay. I agree. I think it's a shade of magenta or something. There's something there.
You're an optimist, and as am I. So, I'm not the first mayor to jump into these kinds of races, but I will tell you, even it's not so much it's the end of my tenure. It's that important. Vice President Harris talks about the fact that we always say this is the most important election of our lifetime. Never before has such an existential threat to our democracy been so clearly on display on a presidential ballot. When you have the leader of the Republican Party who still, and his running mate, still cannot concede an election in which they lost by millions of votes and electoral votes. That's a concern.
At least 7 million in the popular vote and a significant amount in the electoral college.
And, openly talking about Project 2025 and, not just fantasizing about ruling as a dictator, but openly fraternizing with people who are enemies of America to advantage himself in an election. Never before have we been this close to seeing a threat to our democracy maybe since, the mid 1800s. So I think it's that important.
Not all to stay out of jail.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, and you're right. There's also a felon on the ballot. So it's that important. So I have been availing myself during any free time I have to help get the word out, to help the Harris-Walz ticket, previously the Biden-Harris ticket. And I've been going to different places where they are, would like to hear a voice from outside of their area to talk about why I support the vice president. And I talk about the impact that she and President Biden and soon Governor Walz will have on our community. We talk about all these different fundamental challenges that San Antonio has in housing and economic development, all those things. I see that our community has made, has put forth so much effort and has utilized its very constrained resources to do the best we can to move these things forward, and we're making some progress. Where can that progress be accelerated? Well, we talked about some of the federal and state interventions that are necessary. This is the kind of work that Biden and Harris have been committed to move San Antonio forward. We see that through our housing investments. We see that through our labor investments and so forth. I want that to continue, and I want to tell other people about the good work that they've done.
What do you see out there?
I see a lot of optimism, enthusiasm, excitement. I see a high degree of anxiety about how close this election is.
Yes.
And the prospect of having Donald Trump back in the White House. Mm-hmm. And so when I was in New Hampshire not too long ago, and I was knocking on doors with, they sent me to a very independent area. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, there was almost universal support from the people I talked to for Vice President Harris. They recognize the stakes of the election. They recognize that in Kamala Harris, they have someone who actually cares about her constituents. And, she's running against someone who can't stop talking about himself. So I think people recognize that contrast. I was in Nevada to help kick off the AAPI campaign for Harris. A lot of enthusiasm there. She wasn't yet at the top of the ticket. It's only built up from there. And I'm going to be swinging through some of the southern states that are a little closer. And I hope that we're going to make some progress here in Texas. You asked me what I think is going to happen. I think the circumstances are right for Colin Allred to be our next Texas senator. I really do. I mean, you see the progress that has been made by the Democratic nominee for president over the last several cycles. We all know how close Beto came in 2018 during a midterm.
It's 2 or 3 points, right?
Right. I think it was something like 2.5 points.
Yeah. So close.
We did not have the benefit of seeing the grotesquerie of a Donald Trump full term. We do now. We see it has gone into overdrive with Project 2025, so that is all there. We now have the enthusiasm of the next generation of leadership through Vice President Harris. And so I think all the elements are in place. Now the question is, have all the voter suppression efforts by Ken Paxton and his ilk, will they have a dampening effect on what I think is already there in Texas? I think if Texas actually came out to vote, we would already be
all things
blue.
Being fair,
right.
We'd already be blue.
So can we overcome those hurdles? Can we make sure that the voter purge that Paxton has attempted can be overcome? People, are reminded to go register, check your registration, and go vote. If we can do all those things, I'm very optimistic that
get out the vote on that day or before.
Yeah, that Colin will pull it off if we can do that.
Here's the biggest question. It's my final question. What's next for you? If this happens or that happens.
So I assume you mean what happens at the top of the ticket. So I am banking our entire
energy of the universe.
Energy of the universe on Vice President Harris winning, because again, it is that important to our country and our community,
our democracy, our future as a democratic nation.
So I'm not dwelling too much on what happens next. Obviously, that's a big question mark in my mind.
You're going to be unemployed,
right? So my hope is Vice President Harris is elected. I'm working every day to make sure that happens. After that, I'm going to run through the tape as mayor of the city and, ensure that I hand the baton off at full speed to, I hope, someone who is going to continue it in that direction. And after that, I'm going to look to stay in public service. I don't know what that is yet. Obviously, I've been asked if I would consider a role in the administration. I don't know if that's going to be a possibility, but certainly I would be honored. But I'm solely focused right now on doing the best I can for ensuring this campaign wins, and then making sure that we run through the tape and make as much progress as possible here in San Antonio.
Well, let's all hope for a lot of those things. And thank you so much for taking the time and
thank you, Elaine.
Here. You can watch video versions of Nosotros on YouTube and listen to it anywhere you get your podcast. My Metro column appears on Wednesdays and Fridays in the Express News. And if you want to reach me, the best way is through email at eayala@express-news.net. Thanks for listening, and see you next time on Nosotros.